Heather closed the door behind her, crossed the spare 2 feet of her shoebox bedroom, and pushed Nick onto the twin bed. "This would have been a lot easier," he said, struggling, his curly brown hair jiggling, "if you just waited a second." "I'm impatient," she said, shrugging. She pulled on the strings of her sweatpants, sliding them down her legs and leaning forward, presenting her cleavage in its most advantageous position. "I don't like waiting." "You really know how to make a guy feel special," he said, pulling his boxer shorts down. They had only been doing this for a couple of weeks, the whole friends with benefits thing. That was just how Heather liked it. She didn't have a lot of patience after all. She didn't have a lot of time for talking, and the less Nick Panetti talked, the better. They had been friends since senior year of college and had spent the last few years in the city running around in the same crowd. It broke her heart to know she had been missing out on this that whole time. She thought of the 6 months she had wasted last year on Colby, the promising hunky investment banker. The countless autumn weekends spent on bad rebound dates when the cure for what ailed her had been right there in the Stowe Bunnies 2022 group chat this whole time. They hadn't hooked up on that particular ski trip, but the 8 Cornell grads who made the trip to Stowe, Vermont that weekend had become a sort of super clique, the group chat being a staging ground for nights out, dinner parties, weekends away, and all manner of social events that entertained the young grads as they navigated their new life in the big city. She should have suggested they become friends with benefits years ago. Sure, he wasn't super ripped or anything. He wasn't rich, working as an assistant at a media company and pecking out his little screenplays on the side. And she had always categorized him as the goofy brother type as opposed to an authentic love interest. But he was cute. He was attentive. Heather produced a fresh pair of panties from the drawer, along with a pair of pajama pants and an old fraternity t-shirt she'd stolen once upon a time. "Beta?" Nick scowled when he saw the Greek letters on the shirt. "Who?" "Use your imagination," Heather replied, securing her ponytail with a black hair tie. "I'd rather not," he said, pulling his jeans on and sitting back on the bed, buttoning his shirt. "I think too much of you." "This is the part where you leave," Heather thought, pulling his camel hair coat from the closet and handing it over, "before you say any more cute nonsense." "Right," he said. "Yeah, I should get going. I have an early day tomorrow." Nick pulled his coat on, smoothing the collar, and Heather remarked at how grown up he looked these days. Gone were the days of ironic t-shirts and sloppy facial hair. Nick Pasgetti Panetti, against all odds, was turning into a handsome young man. It had always helped that he was a shade over 6 feet tall, but where he had seemed awkward and gangly in college, he was starting to seem more, well, mature, suaver, especially now that he was clean-shaven. He held up his hand and Heather slapped it, moving to the side as he danced around her and out the door, smiling and waving with a little bow. Same old awkward Nick in the end. Some things never change. When the front door closed, Heather stepped into the tiny living room and flopped onto the love seat, resting her feet on the coffee table. The swimsuited contestants of Love Island danced on the TV screen. Her roommate Sasha occupied the other half of the sofa, and she stared at Heather, her jaw wide open. Heather caught her staring out of the corner of her eye, peeling her eyes from the TV and looking back at her roommate, slightly annoyed. "What?" she asked. Sasha finally said. "Were you just with Nick Panetti?" "Guilty." "Oh my God," Sasha shouted, grabbing the back of her head. "What? Since when? How am I just learning this?" "Since like 15 minutes ago." "No," Sasha said, gesticulating wildly. "Since when?" "Since New Year's," Heather said. She nodded slowly, raising her eyebrows, trying to remind Sasha of what happened that night just over a month ago. The ball drops, the arched eyebrow, kissing through Auld Lang Syne, kissing in the Uber back to Nick's apartment. They were drunk. The intimacy was unhinged that night, sloppy, awkward, and ultimately anticlimactic for both of them. But the next morning, after Nick had ordered bagel sandwiches and iced coffee and enough coconut water to drown a small island, after he showed her his collection of old videos from college, including all the harebrained short films he had written, directed, and starred in, after he made her laugh so much, that intimacy was a revelation. That was the basis for a productive and mutually beneficial arrangement that had seen them getting together at least twice a week throughout January and into February. More if they were all out together on the weekend and could coordinate their Irish exits under everybody's noses. Sure, his apartment was a mess. They could use hers when the coast was clear, when Sasha was working weekends or spending the night at one of her own paramours. And sure, he still made dumb jokes that sometimes made her cringe. But his intimacy made up for the cringing, as long as nobody could make fun of her for it, and he still made her laugh too. I know, but I thought that was just a one-time thing. Are you two like dating? Would you stop screaming? You're gonna wake the dead. Sasha leaned across the sofa, grabbing Heather's arms. Are you? No, Heather said. We're just, having fun, that's all. Sasha waited a beat before returning to her previously occupied position and pausing the show. So it's just like another rebound thing? Heather shot daggers at Sasha. Every time you invoke the specter of Colby, we need to burn more sage. It's not a rebound thing, it's just intimacy. I'm done with dating. And I definitely don't want him to be my boyfriend. I just want some physical connection every now and then. And Nick knows how to keep things casual. Oh my God, Sasha said, shaking her head, grinning madly. Who else knows? Nobody else knows, Heather said, picking up the remote and pressing play again. At least I haven't told anybody. They were emphatic about that when they set the ground rules a few days later when Nick texted her on Saturday afternoon to say he had an errand to run in her neighborhood. She was sure he didn't. Not really. But she told him to come over anyway. She stopped him when he tried to kiss her. No kissing, she had said. That's rule number 1. Kissing is romantic, and that's not what we're doing here. Nick could live with that. What are we going to tell people? Nothing, Heather had replied. No telling. That's rule number 2. It's nobody's business. I mean, Sasha's gonna find out. Oh? What makes you so sure this is gonna happen again? Hey, you invited me over? You knew what you were doing when you texted me. You better not have, Sasha said, slapping Heather's arm. Oh my gosh. I can't believe you're seeing Pasgetti. Are you going to do anything for Valentine's Day? Absolutely not, Heather said, before realizing they hadn't even discussed it. And why would they have? They were keeping things casual, she comforted herself with thinking. No reason the upcoming Hallmark holiday should be anything but a normal, regular day. They might not even see each other that night at all. Everything's going to get so weird, Sasha said, her voice distant and dreamy. No, it wasn't, Heather thought. That was rule number 3. No making it weird. Huh. Nick had laughed pretty hard at that. I'll try my best. Then again, Heather thought, with Nick, being weird was always a risk. Heather and Sasha watched the television, laughing at the antics of the young couples on the screen, navigating the challenges the Love Island producers had laid out for them. How do you watch this trash? Heather asked. These people are ridiculous. I don't know, Sasha said. They're just like having fun. Heather threw a pillow and they laughed some more. Maybe we could role play, Nick said that Thursday night. What? She asked, only half listening. You know, role play, he continued, like acting, but real life, like I'm a teacher, you're a hot schoolgirl, and you've forgotten to do your homework. Heather smiled but shook her head. He had been like this in college, too, recruiting people for his films, asking friends to study the ridiculous scenes he'd written and prepare to act them out in front of his iPhone. She and her friends had made fun of it back in school. Sure, she had to admit that after seeing some of the fully edited videos on New Year's Day that he actually might have some talent. But this was all dredging up some tough memories, reminding her why she had been so reluctant to get involved with Nick in the first place. Or I could be a schoolboy. Hell, I could do the homework if you want to go abstract. Heather laughed and shook her head again, her face pleading with him to get serious. Nick was amazing in bed, she thought, but his humor had a way of escaping whatever prison he usually put it in while they were together. She needed to make it disappear. Please don't make me laugh, she said, looking away. It's, distracting. I could dress up like Super Mario, he said. Mamma mia. No, Heather said. Please don't cringe when you're with me, for the love of God. No more talking, please. Nick seemed to get the hint and dropped the subject. Role-playing, though, he said as they got dressed. Really not into it? Heather had thought it was just dirty talk. She didn't realize he was serious. I don't know, she said. Not really. It's kind of, Weird? It's not weird, he said. It's fun. Have you done that before? No, he admitted. Most girls think it's weird. Heather crossed her arms triumphantly. But I don't know, he continued. Whatever this is, shouldn't we be willing to try stuff? Keep it light, keep it fun. You're not having fun? That's not what I mean. You know I am. He dropped the subject and showed himself out. Ever since college, Nick had always been talking about the movies he wanted to make. He had a folder full of aborted screenplay ideas that he brought up in casual conversation, and he had made a couple of amateur shorts at school, roping people into his little skits. Maybe his desire for role-playing was just a natural extension of that, Heather thought. But it felt a little too personal, a little too involved. Heather wanted to keep things purely physical and avoid any unnecessary emotional entanglements. Nick was starting to push things to a weird place. Mamma mia, she said, shaking her head and heading to the bathroom. Sasha was still at work, and the apartment was quiet. Dinner Friday night was a packet of instant rice and a bowl of steamed frozen vegetables. Heather shook salt into the bowl, while Sasha lit a candle on the coffee table, and the two scarfed down their food. They were due at Talea on Christopher Street in an hour, where a few of the Stowe bunnies agreed to meet, and needed to conserve as much of that time as possible to get ready. Heather wore a padded black tube top and jeans, accessorizing with a black choker and teasing her wavy brown hair out. She looked in the mirror and frowned. Her breast always looked bigger in her imagination when she pulled the tube top from the drawer, but it was too late to change now. She could always wear her coat inside, she figured. At least her butt looked good. As soon as Sasha finished straightening her dirty blonde bangs, they were out the door. Talea was a mob scene, as usual, but Evan, Spencer, and Claudia had secured a table in the front. Spencer waved to Heather and Sasha as they stepped in from the February cold, rubbing their hands together and trotting over to the group. "Best seats in the house," Evan cried out above the din, his blue eyes sparkling. "Did you have to get something right by the door?" Sasha asked. "It's freezing." "That's what the drinks are for," Evan said, sliding 2 glasses across the table. Heather kept her coat on while she hugged everyone hello, only removing her scarf when she took her seat. The foretop was already overcrowded with 5, Heather thought. It would be hard for anyone else to find a seat. "Where's Nick?" she asked, trying to avoid making eye contact with Sasha. "Not coming," Spencer said. "Pasquetti's got a hot date," Evan said. "Really?" Heather said, wishing she had practiced her poker face. "Tinder date," Spencer said, shrugging. "Maybe he'll be out later." "Yeah, if he blows it," Evan said, taking a long sip. Heather unzipped her coat and placed it on the back of her chair. It was fine that Nick was on a date, she thought. That was just fine. They were keeping things casual, after all. She might be done with dating, at least for a while, but there was no reason Nick couldn't go out and meet other women. No reason at all. No, Heather thought. That was just fine. "He'll probably blow it," Spencer said. "I don't know," Claudia said. "Valentine's Day is around the corner. A girl might forgive a bad date just to lock up a Valentine." "Pasquetti!" Evan cried, lifting his glass for a toast. They spent the next 2 hours drinking, catching up, complaining about work. Evan ordered a Baroque assemblage of sours. The drink was getting to Heather's head, and soon she was checking her phone every few minutes, hoping to see that Nick was on his way. "Are you getting bored of us?" Evan asked, his speech slurred. Heather flipped her phone over onto its face. "I kinda want to go dancing," Heather said, deflecting. "I don't want to drink all night." "Me neither," Claudia said. They paid the tab and hopped in an Uber XL to the Lower East Side, that stalwart of low frills partying in Lower Manhattan. They bounced from bar to bar, looking for the right vibe, while Heather kept glancing at her phone, jumping every time her bag vibrated only for it to be a message in her family group chat, or some push notification for an app she barely used. "Jamie and some others are at Lullaby," Claudia said, leading the way down the sidewalk. "Am I gonna see you tonight?" Heather texted, leaving the phone at the top of her bag before showing the bouncer her ID. "Let's do shots." There was no official dance floor at Lullaby, so much as a throng of 20-somethings bumping up against each other in every square inch of the constrained space. Heather bumped and grinded on Sasha, on Claudia, on What's-His-Face, on This Guy's Cute, on I Love This Song, on the bar. She threw back shots with the boys, she threw back shots with the bartender. She didn't hear from Nick. She stopped checking her phone. "I don't even care," she told whoever would listen, rarely bothering to explain what it was she didn't care about. She might have kissed a boy, she couldn't tell you. Before she knew it, it was 2 a.m., and she and Sasha were in an Uber home to their Greenwich Village walk-up. They were both panting as they summited the third-floor landing, their legs exhausted from drunkenly dancing the night away. Heather fumbled with the keys and threw the door open, launching her coat and bag onto the floor and collapsing on the sofa. "I need water," Heather said, her voice a scratched record playing foghorn solos. Sasha produced 2 glasses from the galley kitchen and handed one to her roommate. Heather drank slowly, her bleary eyes gazing through the wall. "Spencer's a good friend," Sasha said, curling up in the corner of the love seat. "Taking care of Evan like that." Heather nodded. The night had ended with Evan throwing up in a trash can on the corner of Rivington and Essex, and not for the first time. "Do you think he has, like, a problem?" Heather shrugged. She wasn't thinking of anything, really, other than the unanswered text, which crept back into her imagination as the fog of lullaby receded. Sasha dipped her head down to get a look at Heather's face. "No Nick?" Heather shook her head. "It's fine," she said. "He can do what he wants." "It doesn't bother you at all," Sasha said, framing it like a confirmation, but her skepticism seeped through. "He can do whatever he wants." Heather's headache was a 10 a.m. alarm clock, and she woke up feeling like she'd just come out of surgery and the anesthesia had worn off. She shuffled to the bathroom, drinking water from cupped hands and brushing her teeth while she tried to blink some life into her eyes. She searched her room for her phone before finally remembering it was still in her bag, still in the living room, and her hopes were dashed when she pulled it out and saw the only notifications were from Snow Bunnies 2022. "So much fun last night, you guys," Claudia had sent at 8 a.m. "Charlie, Nick, and Zoe, you guys were missed," Spencer replied. Heather ate a bowl of Cheerios in silence, but for the crunch of the cereal and the kettle drum banging in her head. She stared at her phone, willing it to come to life, willing for Nick's name to flash across the screen. Her phone was not to be persuaded. She chugged a glass of water and headed to the bathroom. "Morning," Claudia said, brushing past Heather en route to the bathroom. "Are you feeling awful?" Heather asked. Claudia shook her head. "I passed my shots to Evan." "Smart." "I couldn't get that drunk. I have to go in today," Claudia said. "This pitch we're working on. I'm going to be so glad when it's over." Heather was so glad her own media planning job rarely required weekend work. Claudia was a junior analyst at a wealth management firm, which meant she was pulling in more money, sure, but it meant they were pulling in a lot more as well. Ordinarily, it also meant a free afternoon to have Nick swing by. Heather closed the door behind her and jumped back into bed, huddling under the covers and mindlessly scrolling social media. She should go to the gym, she thought. Anything to kick this hangover, anything to get Nick out of her mind. As she was rounding out the second mile on the treadmill, her phone finally answered her prior entreaties for contact. The music cut out, and Siri announced a text from Nick Panetti. Heather planted her feet on the deck and swiped her phone open. "Sorry," Nick said. "Just saw this. Rain check?" Heather dropped the phone in the cup holder and resumed her run. She would make him wait for a response. Hell, she might not even respond at all, she thought, increasing the incline and the speed of the belt. Now that he was the last to respond, all the power was hers. She might even just download Tinder again, sort through her photos for the cutest ones and start swiping. She could find a guy at least as cute as Nick who wanted some no-strings-attached intimacy, right? Cuter, probably. No problem, she thought. The mile markers ticked up while she imagined her new profile. Some bikini pictures from the summer were a must. Some tight dresses. Some awkward group photos just to show she was real, that she had friends. Then she remembered why she had deleted the app in the first place. She remembered all the time wasters, flakes, guys who didn't look like their pictures, guys who could barely look her in the eye or carry a conversation, guys who couldn't make love. She ran another 2 miles, brooding on why she had sworn off dating in this god-forsaken city to begin with. A Saturday Netflix binge sounded like the only date she needed. A brisk walk home past the brunch crowd and a steamy shower later, Heather was digging through her drawers for a pair of clean sweatpants when a flash of dark blue poked out from under a pile of gym shorts. She had dressed as a slutty cop for Halloween, she remembered, and never bothered to throw away the tight polyester mini dress that passed for a costume. She tugged on the fabric, flinching at the static sparks it created en route to the outside world, and looked at it. Slutty was putting it lightly, she thought, remembering the look she got at Spencer's party that night. It had a deep V-neck, a fake leather belt, and a shiny plastic badge. She dug around some more for the hat that had come with it, to no avail. She assumed the handcuffs were gone too, but an idea was brewing, and once it took hold she couldn't stop smiling. If Nick wanted role-playing, well, she'd give him role-playing, all right. Heather dropped the towel and pulled the dress over her naked body, feeling it cling to her damp skin. She closed the door and looked in the full-length mirror behind it, checking her profile from both sides, pumping her knees back and forth, leaning forward to get a good look at her butt. She had lost a little weight since Halloween, her waist a bit slimmer, her butt more toned, and the dress looked better than ever. Even though her breast looked good and that was saying something, she donned her longest pair of black boots and found the right pose. Nick Panetti, she added to the mirror selfie caption, breaking her hour-long silence and texting him back. You are wanted for questioning, she fired the selfie off, nearly squealing when the 3 dots of Nick's draft reply immediately popped up on the screen. Silence, Heather said, putting a finger to Nick's lips when she opened the door. She pointed to her bedroom. Into the interrogation room, please. Nick beamed. He stepped into the living room and removed his shoes. Heather shoved him, trying to move him along, accidentally pushing him into the wall. Ow, he said. Do we need a safe word? How about Miranda, Heather said, as in anything you say can and will be used against you. Do I need a lawyer? I'm the law now. Heather closed the bedroom door. Sasha would be at work for the rest of the afternoon, she knew, but it was still good manners. And no real interrogation could ever take place with the door open. Where were you last night, big boy? Nick fought laughter as he complied with the officer's orders, splaying his hands on the bedspread. Heather stood to the side of him, looking him up and down like a livestock inspector before she began. Nick raised his eyebrows. I was out? Whack. Heather's right hand came down like a bolt from Olympus, surprising them both with the speed and ferocity of a righteous smack. Ow! Nick jumped, looking at Heather with a mixture of hurt, glee, and respect. Is there anyone who can vouch for your whereabouts? Yes. Nick chuckled. Heather cocked her head, waiting for more information. I was on a date, okay? Who were you on a date with? Who is she? Where is she from? What does she do? What's she like? Is this Officer Hottie Cop asking or? Whack. Ow. Whack. Her name is Courtney. She's from Indiana. She went to IU. Heather inched around him, thumping her boot heels on the wood floors, squeezing her body between him and her dresser. She could feel the heat radiating from him now. Where'd you take her? Before he could answer, she placed her left hand on his tenderized butt. To Orient Express in the West Village. Did she have fun? I think so. He chuckled again. Yeah, I think she did. Did you? He hesitated. Smack. Nick, Heather continued, rubbing his butt. This is going to go so much more easily if you just tell the truth. Nick took a deep breath and nodded. The truth is, yeah, he said. Yeah, I had fun. It was drinks with a cute girl. Heather fought the urge to spank him right there. She fought hard. But a first date is such a low bar, you know. It's purpose-built to be fun unless one person is a total weirdo or something. Heather nodded. And now for the question that had been running through her mind since she went to bed last night. She built up the courage she needed. Did you sleep with her? Nick hesitated again. Heather wound up. No, he said, flinching as much as he could. No, of course not. It was a first date. Heather stroked him and leaned in. Too bad, she whispered, biting his earlobe, because I would have loved to hear about it. She pushed his head down, stomping in a slow arc to the head of the bed, clapping her hands once to announce her verdict. Nick Panetti, she announced, you have been found guilty of not making love. Your punishment? Heather hiked her dress up above her hips. A very just, said Nick and fell to his knees. It's not like she was normally shy, but the costume, the scenario, the spanking. It had all made her feel so powerful. It had all made her feel like a totally different person. It had all made it so much easier to talk about his date without wanting to scream. "You naughty, naughty boy," she said. She would have felt so silly saying that to anybody else. She would have felt like a downright idiot. And though she could feel Nick laughing, she knew he wasn't laughing at her. She knew he was loving it. She knew it was what he wanted, and she had given it to him, and she liked the way that made her feel, the way he was making her feel. "Damn," she said, sitting back on his chest, sweeping her hair away from her face. "God damn." Nick put his hands on her butt. He looked at her with those soft brown eyes of his like he was about to say something really stupid. "I thought we weren't blaspheming here." Heather rolled her eyes and laughed. "So what happens now, officer?" he asked. "Am I still being detained?" "I can hold you for 24 hours, you know," she said, as proud of her ability to keep up the act as she was of her ability to look good while doing it. She could see it on his face. He was captivated. "I don't even get a phone call?" he asked, moving his hands down her back. "Who are you going to call?" she asked. "Courtney?" "I could," he said. "I could call her up right now, see if she wants to bail me out." "I'd scare her off," Heather said. You think she's afraid of some competition?" "What competition?" Heather sunk her claws into his shoulders, pulled him into her, licked his ear, her breath a pumping steam engine. "She can't compete with me. She can't compete with this sweetness." "She can't compete with this sweetness?" he asked, as if begging her to explain herself. Heather just shrugged. "You tell me." Heather responded to text messages while Nick got dressed, watching him out of the corner of her eye. She still wore the slutty cop costume, having pulled down the skirt, but it felt to her like the scene had ended and she wasn't sure how to cut to next. She sat up and beat a tattoo on the bedspread until she got his attention. "So," she said, "Spencer and a few others say they're going to Fiddlesticks tonight." "Oh yeah?" Nick asked, seemingly disinterested. Heather felt antsy. "You gonna go? Or do you have plans?" Nick stood up, fastening his belt buckle and fixing his shirt. He cracked his knuckles and stretched his neck, taking a second or two longer than Heather thought was strictly necessary. "Think I might just stay in tonight," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Maybe do some writing. I've been working on a new screenplay." "Don't make it weird," Heather thought. "Oh, don't make it weird. Okay." Nick wheeled around. He was looking at her now. "Is that cool?" he asked, his tone suggesting that he assumed she'd have thought nothing of it. "Totally. Yeah. Do your thing." He put his hands on his hips. Heather was suddenly aware of how eager she looked, kneeling on the bed, palms down on the bedspread. She sat back, crossing her legs and looking at her nails, hoping she looked half as casual as she wanted to pretend she felt. Nick nodded, suppressing a laugh. "Well, how about I text you later?" "Sure," she said. "Whatever." "Or, he said. "You could text me." "I just don't get 'em," Heather said, sipping a glass Sasha had picked up on the way home from her office. Sasha ducked out from the bathroom, towel on, hairdryer roaring. She furrowed her brow to indicate she hadn't heard a thing Heather had said. Heather rolled her eyes and took another gulp, stretching her legs on the sofa. She checked her phone. There had been no texts, messages, or other updates since Zoe and Claudia's confirmation that they were getting ready and planning to be at Fiddlesticks at 9 o'clock. The hairdryer stopped, and in the sudden silence, Heather felt the desire to throw her wine glass against the wall, run into her room, and go to sleep. She logged this thought as invasive, considered it, and threw it away. She looked at her phone again. There had been no new messages in the intervening seconds. "Give me like 5 minutes," Sasha said, disappearing into her bedroom. "You could text me," Nick had said. Psh, like she was that desperate. It was Saturday night in the city. It was time to go out, see friends, and get crazy. She thought of Nick sitting in his studio apartment, hunched over his desk and typing away at his laptop while the sounds of the evening drifted past his window. Every 20-something in the city would be out trying to make things happen tonight, whether they could afford to or not. And she sure couldn't, she thought. She was dining on white rice and frozen vegetables most nights, drinking on her friends' tabs, drinking on strangers' tabs, if they let her. The first round at Fiddlesticks was on Spencer. They crowded around the bar, laughing at Evan's misfortunes from the prior evening. Not that he looked any worse for wear, Heather thought. Evan had the supernatural ability to black out one evening and shine like a star the next. By the second round, she found herself wondering if he would be any good in bed, if he would make Nick jealous. And then Heather considered another possibility. Maybe there was no screenplay. Maybe this was no night in. Maybe Nick was off with Courtney right now, gallivanting through the city like Astaire and Rogers. Maybe Heather was just the other girl letting slip her opportunity to be the main attraction. "Are you okay?" Sasha asked, stepping between Heather and the rest of the crew as they started singing along to Oasis. "You seem really distracted." "I'm fine," Heather said, nodding and pulling her phone from her bag. Sasha nodded, patting her friend on the arm and turning back to the Glee Club. "Hey," Heather texted. "Wid?" Nick opened the door in a pair of old lacrosse shorts and a long-sleeved t-shirt, looking back at the mess in his apartment with a mixture of shame and defiance. "If you can believe it," he said, "I've spent the last 30 minutes tidying up." Heather shuffled in, placing her bag on the empty mini-fridge that served as his mail depository, and plopped down on the sloppily made bed, leaving her coat beside her. His laptop was open on his desk, a stream of courier text laid out against a white background. Nick saw her looking and drew himself up to full height. "I've made some pretty good progress," he said. "It's coming along. I've got one really good scene, I think. I can picture it perfectly in my head. I just need to, get it down right." He was cute like this, Heather thought, excited about something that wasn't just money or social positioning, something that was his own, that he'd thought of, that he was trying to make happen. She smiled, feeling grateful she had reached out and that he had answered, that she had slipped away from the group early as it was, feeling grateful there was no evidence of Courtney in this pigsty. "Tell me about it," she said, patting the lumpy spot on the duvet beside her. "So," he said, sitting down, keeping one leg on the ground and putting the other on the bed behind her. "It's about a guy and a girl." "Yeah, I know, real original. But the scene opens up, and this guy is in a restaurant. Nice one. Real fancy. People are dressed up. Old school. 1940s, 1950s, I haven't decided." She leaned into him, pushing him back into the bed and feeling his chest. "And this guy, he's sitting there alone at the table. Middle of the restaurant, clear view. Maybe there's a rose on the table, I don't know." She looked into his eyes and nodded along. "The waiters, a bunch of old Italian guys, keep looking over like, what's with this guy? He's all alone, just sitting there. Maybe they keep filling his water, asking if he's ready to order, and he's like, no, I'm waiting for someone, she's coming, she's worth the wait." The waiters are like, "Oh sure," but they back off. I mean, it's only been a little bit, and they're just doing their job, like he respects that. And then sure enough, there she is, standing at the maitre d's table, or whatever you call it, and she is gorgeous. I'm talking, how tall are you? Heather giggled and squeezed. 5'8". "Ah, she's gorgeous, like 5 feet 8 inches of all-American sizzle. Flawless body, red dress, knockout. The kind of girl the guys used to dream about before heading off on their big adventures, Heather laughed. "He stands up, he's a gentleman, Pull out the chair, they air kiss like a Milanese couple, all eyes on them. The violinists make the rounds notice and they sweep over playing Santa Lucia or something, giving him the eyebrows and everything." Heather bit her lip, gave Nick the eyebrows and everything. "Ah," he moaned and closed his eyes, nodding. "Yeah, the food comes. They feed each other." Heather pulled his shorts down. "It's clear they're in love. Or he's in love, at least." And then he tells her. "What does he tell her?" Heather asked. Nick smiled, shrugging and nodding. "That he loves her." Heather lifted her top over her head and brought Nick's hand to her breast. "Damn," she said, flinching and dispelling the magic. "Why are your hands so cold? Warm them up." She hopped off the bed while he rubbed his hands together, breathing on them to give them some life. Heather's jeans were off in a flash. That's enough patience, she thought, and her cute little panties with Saturday written on the front followed suit. "The cop thing was hot before," Nick said. "You liked that?" "I loved it. You were a natural, a born star. I didn't spank you too hard?" "Maybe a little," Nick said. They laughed. "I was thinking we could do it again sometime." "Oh yeah, but I don't have any more costumes." "Well, I was thinking, if you're up for it, we could do something like the scene I wrote, Heather stopped and looked up. You know, Nick continued, I'm at a restaurant, you come in wearing a killer red dress. Nick ... Heather said, like she was about to remind him of something important. That sounds an awful lot like a date. No, Nick said, shaking his head. You've got it all wrong. It's research for a scene. Nothing like a date. Uh-huh, Heather said. And so, what happens next? Assuming I'm into it. Well, that's the thing, Nick said. That's all I've written so far. The rest is in my head, but we'd be, researching. And when would we do this? Nick's fingers stroked Heather's back, and he pulled her into him. I was thinking, Friday? I already made a reservation, so I hope that works. Friday? That's... Heather stopped and looked up again, regarding Nick with friendly skepticism. Valentine's Day? Is that Valentine's Day? Nick smiled. Honestly, I didn't even realize. Heather had a hard time concentrating at work that week. She fumbled assignments, mixed up names for an important team discussion, accidentally inviting a client to an internal-only meeting. Luckily, her supervisor caught the error, but Heather still got reamed out. No dates was so fundamental to the rules that it hadn't even been enumerated. No kissing, no telling, no making it weird, that's what they had spelled out, but only after agreeing they definitely were not dating, that they definitely would not be going on any dates. But Heather had agreed to Nick's little scheme in the end, after securing his scout's honor that Friday night wouldn't be a date. At the time, it satisfied her. But in the cold light of day that week, she started having second thoughts. What she had had with Nick the last month had been amazing. No strings attached intimacy, pretty much whenever she wanted it. She could dial him up, get it in, and get him out. And they'd been able to do it without tipping off the rest of their friends, besides Sasha. At least she didn't think anyone knew. She didn't think Sasha would say anything, and it hadn't gotten complicated yet. Right? Besides, Heather told herself, it's not like going on one measly little Valentine's Day date meant they were dating. It didn't mean they'd have to come out to their friends and family. It didn't mean they'd have to plan everything around the other. It didn't mean they'd have to either get married or break up. But that's where things were headed at this rate, weren't they? What had started as an hour-long visit here or there had gotten more intricate. She'd been thinking about him when they weren't together. She'd been jealous of the other girls he'd been seeing. She had been fixating on this Courtney character from Friday night, and she'd been quietly thrilled despite herself that Heather had gotten the Valentine's Day look instead of her. Maybe Nick had made the booking with Courtney, or even someone else she didn't even know about, in mind, but asked Heather because that would be less complicated. Because Heather wouldn't get the wrong idea. She didn't know if that was better or worse. Heather scrolled through Amazon and Shein, shaking her head that Nick thought girls just had killer red dresses lying around. Boys really were clueless, she thought, and Nick was no exception. Every time she thought she found an option, something cute and red that fit her meager budget, she could only think of how the colors would mismatch the picture, that the fabric would be cheap, that she would look cheap. That's what you got when you had $20 to spend on a dress, she texted Sasha, desperate enough to risk divulging this latest development in her non-relationship. Do you have a red dress I could borrow Friday night? The exclamation mark reaction was enough to send Heather crawling under her desk until her next meeting. So, where's he taking you? Heather was barely listening to Sasha as she looked in her reflection. The crimson Prabal Gurung one-shoulder mini dress was beautiful, and far nicer than anything Heather had hanging in her own closet, but it didn't fit. The bust was too big and sagged off of Heather's chest no matter how she stood. Ugh, Heather said, stamping her foot. Your breast is too big. Sasha looked down at her chest. My breasts aren't that big, she protested, if only to be polite. But the difference was clear and well understood. Heather's slight B-cup breasts were no match for Sasha's full D-cups. Can you tape it? Heather held the fabric against her chest, watching with dismay as it buckled and flared. No, she said, her shoulders slumped. It won't work. Well, what do you care how it looks? It's not really a date, after all. Sasha stuck her tongue out. Heather rolled her eyes as she slipped the strap off her shoulder and stepped out of the dress. Someone's catching feelings. Sasha, you're not helping. What? Sasha took the dress from Heather, smoothing it out and returning it to its hanger. You like him. It's cute. Heather didn't want to like him. Already things were getting too complicated. Already she was worried about what people would say about her spending cuffing season with a guy they used to all make fun of. It was always good-natured, or at least she thought it was, but Nick Panetti wasn't exactly considered a heartthrob in their circles, at least not historically, and she hated the idea of giving up on her freedom, of foreclosing on all the other thousands of eligible guys out there in the city. "What am I going to do?" Heather asked, sitting on Sasha's bed. The shearling throw on the bedspread felt nice against her bare skin. "About the feelings. About the dress," Heather shouted. "You could ask Zoe," Sasha said. "She's close to your size. She's like 5 inches shorter than me, and she's rail thin." Sasha placed her hands on Heather's shoulders. "Just ask her. She's going to want to know who it's for." "So?" Sasha asked. "Just tell her you're going on a romantic Valentine's date with Pasgetti and want to look hot for him." Heather pushed Sasha off, sending her roommate away, giggling. Zoe might indeed have something for her, Heather thought, and so she texted her, arranging to go to her apartment the next night to raid her closet. "I've got just the thing," Zoe said, breaking the hug and leading Heather through the living room. Heather waved to Zoe's roommates Nat and Billy, who had been in Zoe's sorority at Cornell and were camped out on the couch, watching some karaoke All-Star Channel Leanne rhymes on The Voice. Their living room was significantly more spacious than Heather's and Sasha's, and she wished for a moment that her parents had been as helpful with rent as Zoe's were obviously being. "Just the thing for what?" Nat asked, eyes glued to the screen. "I've got this dinner thing," Heather said, picking up the pace and hustling Zoe to her room. "Heather's got a Valentine's date," Zoe said. "Can I come?" Billy asked. "Kyle still hasn't planned anything." Zoe closed her bedroom door while Heather stepped into the room. Even Zoe's bedroom was bigger than Heather's. Not that that was hard to accomplish. "I forgot how huge your place is," Heather said, putting her coat on Zoe's desk chair. Zoe threw open her closet doors and began to rifle through the dresses hanging therein, finally locating her target and gently coaxing it out of the tightly packed melange. She held it up on display, and Heather walked over. It was a cherry red short-sleeved mini dress, with a sweetheart neckline and a flared skirt with cut-out floral embellishments. "Try this," Zoe said, handing Heather the hanger. "I usually wear it with a strapless push-up, but you may not need to. It's a little big on me, but should fit you just right." Zoe was about 5 feet 4 inches tall, and rail thin, as Sasha had pointed out. While Heather was self-conscious about her smaller boobs, she felt stacked compared to Zoe. "It looks a little short," Heather said, holding the dress against her body. "Well, it's church-appropriate for me," Zoe said, her hands on her hips. "It might be a little short on you." "So what?" Heather removed her t-shirt and sweatpants, opting for a nude thong and no bra for the fitting. She raised the dress up and slipped her arms through the sleeves, letting it fall on her body, lifting the strands of her wavy brown hair that had gotten stuck in the back. A full-length mirror stood in the corner, and Heather walked over. "Zip me up?" Heather asked. Zoe pulled the zipper up the back, and Heather let her hair fall. "Okay," she said, turning and lifting her feet behind her. The dress was short, a little higher than mid-thigh, but the flaring helped preserve some space, some ability to move, and the bust fit perfectly, the sweetheart neckline giving an impression of cleavage that made Heather's heart skip a bit. "It's a little short, but you look hot," Zoe said. On the hanger, the dress read as cute more than hot, but Heather had to agree. She looked hot, she thought. She wished she had a pair of matching red stilettos to wear it with. Nick would go crazy. Her chest tightened at the thought, and she wrinkled her nose. "What's wrong?" Zoe asked. "You don't like it?" "It's not that," Heather said, observing the back of her thighs, the curve of her butt. The cutout embellishments began just below where her butt ended, but if she stretched her legs just so. "I love it, and then he's gonna love it too," Zoe threw up her hands. "That's good, right?" she asked. "Yeah," Heather said. "Yeah, that's good." "Sasha," Heather called toward the bathroom door. "I'm borrowing a pair of shoes." "Which ones?" she called out, shouting over the shower. She, Claudia, and Nat were doing a Galentine's dinner across town. Heather never did ask whether Kyle planned something with Billy, and made a note to text her that weekend. The gold heels. Just don't puke on them when Nick drops the L word. Heather trotted back to her bedroom and closed the door, taking one last look at herself before calling a cab. She had blow-dried and straightened her hair, tying a big gold bow to the back. She wore her grandmother's gold pendant, with an inscription on the inside denoting a Bible passage she couldn't quite remember. She wore the gold Tiffany teardrop bracelet her parents had given her for graduation. With Sasha's gold heels, the ensemble was complete. She didn't know if she qualified as the 1940s siren Nick's screenplay called for, but she was fairly pleased with what she had pulled together. "I'm leaving. Have fun." "When you get here," Nick texted. "The table is under Shane McGowan, so call me Shane." Nick's text brought her back down to earth as the Uber crawled down Bleecker Street. She had been so fixated on the romantic minefield they were walking into that she had all but forgotten he had originally billed this as a role-playing scenario. That might help her keep her head straight, she thought. "I'm not having a romantic date with Nick Panetti," she convinced herself. She texted back. "Call me Carlotta." Nick sent an animated gif of a howling wolf, and Heather put her phone back in her bag before she could have any second thoughts. To think she had thought this dinner might be romantic, it was still Nick Panetti she was dealing with. The Uber pulled up to Il Buco a minute after 8. Heather stepped into the cold February air, clutching her faux white fur coat to her body and shuffling to the door. She wished she had worn leggings as the wind bit, but thanked her lucky stars she had reconsidered going commando. It was just too cold for that kind of thing. The air in the restaurant was warm and filled with the sound of violins trilling, glasses and silverware clinking, and couples chatting. Heather handed her coat to the attendant and placed the ticket in her bag. "Table for Shane McGowan?" Heather looked across the restaurant and found Shane, sitting in a booth in the far corner. Nick stood up and waved. Not exactly how he drew it up, Heather thought. But she laughed and followed the maitre d' past the candle-lit, rustic wooden tables to the back of the restaurant. "Carlotta," Nick said, emphasizing each syllable, holding her hands and leaning back to take all of her in. "You are a vision." Heather thought Nick looked like a vision himself. He wore a cashmere turtleneck sweater with a houndstooth jacket and charcoal slacks, looking like he had fallen right out of the pages of GQ. She had never seen him dress so nicely, and wondered if he too had to borrow any of his outfit. It suited him, she thought, and she might recommend that he not return any of it. He leaned in, and for a moment Heather hoped and feared he was going to kiss her, before he turned his face to the side, kissing the air by her cheek and repeating the action on the other side. Heather laughed and let go of his hands, smoothing her skirt and holding it in place while she slid into the booth. "You've really outdone yourself, Shane," she said, still laughing. She turned her head and looked around the restaurant, taking in the range of couples present. They were old and young, straight and gay, and looking very happy and in love. As she turned back to face Nick, he held a single red rose under his nose, and then handed it to her. "Happy Valentine's Day, Carlotta." "So, how does this work?" Heather asked. "Role-playing?" "Let's just pretend we're deeply, madly in love." They fed each other, leaning over the table and laughing when their elbows hit the candles. The waiters brought a pasta al limone next, with long, creamy strands of bucatini smothered in a silky lemon sauce. Heather lost it when Nick suggested they Lady and the Tramp it, and lost it again when he tried to pick up a strand from the plate with his mouth. It was all rather less romantic than the scene he had described at his apartment the previous weekend. Heather wouldn't have had it any other way. She was having fun. Nick was fun, she thought. The waiters returned with a rabbit stew and veal medallions, replacing their sharing plates and filling their glasses. "To us," Nick toasted, "and to many more years of happily wedded bliss. To you, my beloved Carlotta." Heather smiled and sipped, letting the romance of the evening sweep her away. She partly wished Nick would drop the act already. It was amusing at first, but the longer the dinner went on, the less she felt she was even role-playing to begin with. Certainly her improvisational skills were much more limited than Nick's, who could conjure up entire scenes and backstories on a whim. He referenced the ongoing negotiations over a motor yacht he had had his eye on, for instance, and his sister's recovery from her recent frontal lobotomy. It was all very funny in the abstract. Nick was a natural comedian, not a natural romantic, but she wasn't in the mood for funny. The scene he had described in bed had been oozing with romance and intimate appeal. She was afraid of accepting his invitation, afraid of complicating the dynamic. But now that she was here, among the candles and drinks and violins, she wanted romance. Or maybe that was just Carlotta speaking. While she couldn't match him on improv skills, she realized, she could more than outmatch him on intimate appeal. That would be her angle on Carlotta's character, rather than any clever lines. The drinks had lowered her inhibitions by now, and she thought she knew just the thing Carlotta might do to heat things up. "Put your hands under the table," she whispered. He did so, and she looked around the restaurant, ensuring nobody was watching them too closely. Heather reached her hands up the side of her flared skirt, hooked her thumbs into the waistband of her panties, and slowly slid them down her legs and placed it into his waiting hands. Nick's eyes went wide as he processed the object in his fingers, eventually peeking under the table to confirm what he must have already realized. His jaw dropped, and he too looked around to make sure nobody was watching. "Hang on to those," Heather said. "I don't need them." Nick raised his arm and flagged down the waiter, handing over his credit card. "But there is still dessert," the waiter said. "Let's take it to go," Heather told him. Heather huddled close to Nick in the vestibule, his camel hair coat surrounding her sides, paper bag full of chocolate cake in her hands while they waited for the Uber. She looked up at him, breathing in his subtle woody cologne, and letting her Carlotta persona take the fall if she failed. She pursed her lips. "Hey, Shane." He kissed her. Nick's lips tasted like expensive drinks and savory meat, and Heather gorged herself. Kissing Nick wasn't so bad, she thought. No reason they couldn't do this too, right? Nick led her to the Uber, opening the door and holding her hand as she entered, belatedly remembering to hold her skirt and not flash the driver as she climbed across the seat. No sooner had Nick closed the door than he was pressing his mouth on hers, his hand running up her leg. Now this was more like it, Heather thought. If all she had to do to keep him quiet and make him manhandle her was kiss him, then she would have been kissing him this whole time. 33rd and Lex? The driver asked. Nick gave a thumbs up. Heather was almost disappointed when the elevator bell dinged to note they had arrived on Nick's floor. He broke the kiss and held her hand, leading her down the hallway to his apartment. Heather braced herself for the mess, preparing to ignore the piles of clothes and mail and empty cans. But when Nick held the door open, her jaw nearly dropped. The man had cleaned. The floors were visible. The desk was clear. He took her coat and hung it in his closet, which he had organized, presumably just for the occasion. Her heart leapt in her chest. Her legs itched. She moved to kiss him again, but he guided her to the small sofa that had always been buried under coats and clothes, while he produced a bottle from the erstwhile empty mini-fridge and 2 sparklingly clean flutes. He poured. They clinked. He dimmed the lights, and soon Joe Stafford was singing No Other Love over his laptop speakers. Nick held his hand out. "Dance with me?" Heather took his hand, stepping out of her heels. "Our wedding song," she said, her voice low and husky. "Shane, you're too much." They swayed together on the area rug, their bodies close, moving to the gentle swing of the song. Heather held her face against his chest, smelling his cologne again, feeling his hand fidget on her waist. They kissed. He lifted her to the bed. Wait, Heather said, stepping back onto the floor, reaching for the zipper. "It's not my dress. I don't want to ruin it." Nick reached around her, lowering the zipper. Heather pulled her arms through the sleeves and let the dress fall to the floor, standing there naked but for her gold bracelet and her grandmother's pendant. She raised her arms in a V and threw back her head. "Take me to bed, Shane." He lifted her again and lay her down on the covers. She had thought she was rescuing the magic in the restaurant, but the music, the clean apartment. Shane had really invested in the evening. He hadn't just made a reservation, dressed up nicely. He had thought, he had planned, he had wanted to. Heather turned her head and kissed him, spinning onto her back and pulling him in close, feeling so warm in the weight of his embrace. Her whole body felt alive with anticipation. She couldn't sit still. "Take me," she whispered. "I need to feel you close." However casual she had meant to keep it, they had gotten to know each other these past 6 weeks. What they wanted, what they liked, who they were in private, who they could be together. She liked him. Damn, but she was crazy about him. She hadn't intended to be. She had tried hard not to. But he was all she thought about these past 2 weeks. The way he looked at her, the way he made her laugh. She liked him. She couldn't deny it. She didn't want to. That was incredible, he said, raising his face and looking her in the eye. I love you, Carlotta. Heather kissed him and held the back of his neck, stroking his hair, softening her eyes. I love you too, Nick.